Welcome to Let's Get to Work, Reimagining Disability Inclusive Employment Policy, brought to you by the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. And now, here's your host, Michael Morris.
Welcome back to another series in our podcast program, Let's Get to Work, really thinking about reimagining disability inclusive employment policy. I'm so excited today to bring our guest to you. Jay Burks is the Director of Supplier Diversity at the Comcast Corporation, where he is responsible for implementing policies and procedures to increase opportunities for diverse-owned businesses in the procurement of products and services. He has more than 20 years of experience in the whole world of entrepreneurship, supply chain management, and we're going to learn a lot about what is the relevance of all this to people with disabilities, particularly individuals who have started small businesses. So, Jay, welcome to the show, and let's jump right in. In our audience, we may have some very savvy people who have a lot of experience, understand a lot about supplier diversity, but I suspect we have a lot of people that's not exactly a term they understand. So maybe you can start us off with explaining what is supplier diversity and why is it important, and is its importance increasing?
Yes, thank you. Of course, Michael, and thank you for having me today. Just the basic foundation definition of supplier diversity, I think, is providing equitable access to supply chain opportunities. And that definition, access, which is consistent with, disability and persons with disabilities, accessibility, and ensuring the opportunities are equitable to all individuals. Because traditionally, if you think of, the supplier diversity originated within the government procurement some time ago. I believe under the Nixon administration, some time ago, way back when. And if you think about procurement and diversity and inclusion just in general, a lot of the individuals making the decisions were not diverse. And naturally, non-diverse individuals keep a non-diverse circle, which equals non-diverse businesses that they look to procure with. So in essence, supplier diversity is looking to remedy that gap. And I think it's increasingly important as we look at, today and just the challenges with the economy, the supply chain, inflation, recession we keep using, the small business owner, which the majority of small businesses, new small businesses, are being created by diverse populations, minorities, women, persons with disabilities, and veterans. So I think, supplier diversity is critically important to, kind of steadying the economic ship, if you will.
As you've explained what supplier diversity is all about, can you talk a little bit about why, not just Comcast, but really a growing number of companies, this is a really important area. This isn't charity. This isn't a handout. How does it add business value?
Well, it adds business value. You're correct. It's not charity. It's not a handout. It adds business value because it makes the procurement professional or the person procuring goods and services reach out to different populations and to come up with innovative solutions. So I think that's super important. And also with regard to, supplier diversity, we want to, and companies realize this, and Comcast definitely realizes this, we want to represent the communities that we serve. So folks that are using our products and services, we want to ensure we employ those folks that are using our products and services, as well as use businesses that are owned by those individuals that support our services. We want to represent the communities that we serve. And I think businesses recognize that not only as a supply chain innovative strategy, but from a consumer strategy. I want to buy from a company that represents the communities and the things that I believe in.
And in your work in supplier diversity, has the groups that you've targeted, has that continued to expand? Sort of where did it start? And I suspect businesses owned by people with disabilities are probably the new kids on the block.
Well said. Definitely. And I think, when I said originally, starting within the Nixon administration, it was targeted towards minorities, then it expanded to women entrepreneurs, and then veterans and service-disabled veterans. The NGLCC, the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, but persons with disabilities definitely is the new kids on the block. And coincidentally, they happen to be the largest market, if you will. Individuals with disabilities are a huge population across the country.
When did disability-owned businesses join that growing list that you're targeting for supplier diversity?
I want to say I've been a part of Disability N. Prior, it was USBLN. 10 years, a little over 10 years. I've been a part of Comcast a little over 10 years. And, when I came on board to Comcast, that's when we became active with regard to, Disability N and, identifying DOBEs. And the challenge was there wasn't a large population, and platforms like this, I think, are so critically important because if there's disabilities across the spectrum, cognitive, physical disabilities, and individuals may not even be aware that an organization like Disability N is out there championing, for utilizing businesses owned by persons with disabilities.
Was there any particular motivating factor that brought the DOBEs into the larger context of supplier diversity procurement efforts at Comcast?
I think just naturally, it was a natural progression, and having an organization that was the foundation to provide DOBEs was critically important. And if you look at, some of the products and services that we provide at Comcast with regard to the voice activated remote, video description, it's consistent with our accessibility initiatives across the board. So it was just a natural thought that, we should be working with disability-owned businesses, and Disability N was able to provide that central resource for organizations that are certified as such.
So it's been a number of years, and are you pleased with the progress that you're making? I know in working with Disability N, one of the real issues is to bring more disability-owned businesses into certification, into a place where they can be competitive, both in terms of price, service, quality. What kind of progress have you been making on those issues?
This is an industry, supplier diversity, if you will, where it's always, how should I say, always wanted to improve. You never rest on your laurels. I can say, oh yeah, we made great progress, and we have made some great progress working with organizations as far as staffing, promotional items, management, consulting. But I think there's more we can do. The pool of DOBEs is not as large as one would expect, and one of the things that I've been championing is sitting on the International Certification Committee, getting some of our teams involved with the International Certification Committee, because I think just more awareness within the organization. We just had a DE&I event for persons with disabilities, and we were on the call, and there's probably about 100 people on the call within procurement. And it's just funny. I loaded the question. I said, where can I find disability-owned businesses? I knew the answer, and then I just posted it in the chat, because I think that even though the team should know that, and they do know that, it's always a friendly reminder to say, hey, Disability N is a great resource, and here's a list of DOBEs.
Great. Probably something that our listener audience would like to learn more about is, how do you measure the success of your supplier diversity initiatives? And has that changed over time?
I'd say it has evolved, but it's really the fundamental basics has been pretty much the same. But we break it down into 4 pillars. I've used this 4-pillar strategy several times with regard to organic vendor growth, looking at our incumbent diverse vendors and ensuring they grow. Tier 2, diverse subcontracting, looking at our prime non-diverse partners and ensuring that they're using disability-owned businesses, diverse-owned businesses. And the 3rd pillar is new vendors, bringing on new vendors on board. And the 4th pillar is capacity building and, reaching out and ensuring that the business owners have the knowledge to compete. And I think that 4th pillar, capacity building, has grown and evolved more than any other 3 pillars, just because of the dynamics and nature and changing of the business. As a matter of fact, we just had a mergers and acquisitions masterclass event, which will be produced shortly. But that's the nature of the business. We weren't talking about mergers and acquisitions, a few years ago, but now it's so critically important for businesses to grow and evolve in this changing market.
And I think that takes us to kind of an area of focus, as you said, capacity building. Can you describe the kinds of mentoring and training programs that you offer that support the growth and success of diverse suppliers? And have you been able to get DOBEs to participate in those programs?
Yes, we have. And, Michael, there's so many organizations that offer a lot of training, and just coming from the state and understanding how to leverage those resources. I think one of the things is you don't want to really, how should I say, I don't like to duplicate, other trainings that are out there. If somebody says, hey, can you help me with my business plan? Yes, I can help you with the business plan, but there's umpteen organizations that can help with the business plan. So, a couple of the past trainings that we've done, over the last 2 years, not last 2 years, but the last few years, were very customized. The one training we called it Project Orion, which was targeted towards, an industry that's full of diverse-owned businesses, not a lot of startup capital involved for this industry, IT staffing. And we had a couple of DOBEs involved in this Orion, where we introduced them into a platform where they could compete, we could distribute the opportunities, and we would offer customized coaching and mentoring to the respective diverse-owned business, and that has proven to be successful. We're looking to restart it in Q1 2023, and it's an easier process to bring in DOBEs, because with the IT staffing, there's a lot of firms in that space. And then there was something else on the NBC Universal side of the business where we call it EDGE, which is Entrepreneurs Driving Growth and Excellence, where we had a curriculum-based capacity building course sprinkled in with some subject matter experts over the creative marketing production industry, where there's a huge gap for diverse-owned business in that space. So these have been two very customized trainings that we've executed over the last few years.
One good way of bringing disability-owned businesses into the fold is as being subcontractors to the prime. Has that then led to new awareness and of capacity, capability, that then they have graduated on to being prime contractors?
Yes, and in several instances it has, and I think one of the things that's key within dealing with primes, primes aren't aware all the time of the diverse categories. The automatic default is minority business. I mean, that's just this is the programming that a lot of primes have. It's just a minority business, and you have to purposely correct that narrative and say, look, I get it, minority businesses. Okay, let's break that down: African American, Hispanic American, Native American, Asian American. But there's also, LGBTQ plus, there's veterans, there's persons with disabilities, and you have to educate them on that process. And, we've connected subs clearly that have worked with us, diverse subs that have become direct to us. And that's a way to get in to some corporations, is to let them know, hey, I've been subbing for company XYZ, can we get a direct opportunity? And oftentimes that may not be the case, but definitely if you're subbing, and any business owners that are listening to this, reach out to that respective supplier diversity professional and let them know, hey, we're subbing, and they should have that data, but say, hey, we're subbing, just introduce yourself, and then they can work to grow that relationship.
Is there a way to look at disability-owned businesses? Are the challenges they face different in any way than the challenges you have of bringing other new groups into, whether it's, as subs or primes? Similar issues, or are there some additional challenges that you might point out?
I think there are similar issues, but I don't want to rubber stamp all the issues being the same. Clearly, I believe, there are a set of different issues. You have to make sure your organization is accessible. When you're producing RFPs, you have to make sure they're accessible to the respective community. If you are, having, walkthroughs and things of that nature, you have to make sure all this is accessible to the respective person who is looking to work with your organization. So, I don't, like I said, I didn't want to broad brush all of the challenges, but I think, when you're working with a respective community, you have to acknowledge some of these challenges, cultural challenges that may be aware. You have to acknowledge these, and you have to make sure that you provide resources to overcome any of those challenges. And accessibility is key. And it's always, this cliche example of the recessed curb, it's good for everybody. I hear it all the time. People use it all the time, but it's good for everybody. It's good for business. So some of the challenges that we face with the respective community, if we correct those challenges, it makes it better for everyone.
I noticed in reading about your background that before you were at Comcast, you were in the public side in the state of Delaware. You headed up the Office of Supplier Diversity. And I wondered if you can share with our listeners, are there some distinct differences between doing procurement within the public sector versus the private sector?
Michael, those two key operative words that you just finished up with, public versus private, that's clearly a perfect example or description, I should say, of working with the state versus working with, a company like a Comcast or a Fortune 50 company. The public is everything is transparent over a certain threshold. I want to say $10,000. You see every dollar, you see every contract, and then you can even FOIA. You can say, you know what, Freedom of Information Act. I want to see the contract. I want to see who bid it. I want to see all that stuff. On the private side, it's not as transparent, which may be advantageous in some ways because you can get to know, who your procurement professionals are. You can cultivate that relationship. You can build that relationship, and you can target opportunities. The public sector, that's the transparency piece of the public sector versus the private sector. And then in the public sector, there's an opportunity to build in goals and challenges when you build in goals in the public sector. Is this thing called a disparity study, a disparity statement? It's like we live in a litigious community, or a litigious, just everybody wants to sue. If you don't get an RFP, if you don't get awarded, it's because this person was, this person was fulfilling a goal, or they, so you have to be careful in the public sector when you have goals and you have call outs, because there's the other side of the house that's saying, you know what, this is unfair. This is, reverse discrimination. So why are you putting these goals in when there's no evidence? And that's what a disparity study. As a matter of fact, the state of Delaware on their website just came out with a disparity study. But on the public side, on the private side, it's not as transparent, and there's more opportunity, in my opinion.
Which gives you more flexibility.
Yes.
And particularly for the disability community, gives you a lot more discretion to really kind of lift up and bring new small businesses into procurement that it sounds like might be more complicated on the public sector side.
Exactly, Michael. And just to a key point, when we look at our numbers, we have numbers across every constituent group, if you will, and we say, hey, we want this RFP. We want to make sure we have persons with disabilities from Disability In on this one. We want to make sure we have someone from the NGLCC on. We can influence that to make sure it's equitable representation in the competition.
Fantastic. Having dealt with government and public agencies, that's immediately leads to, suspicion and challenges. And I consider it a plus, one person's point of view. Does government contracting requirements play a role in your private side supplier diversity program?
Yes. A lot of corporations touch the government in several ways, in Comcast, we touch the government with Comcast Business. We have several federal government contracts. And, to the federal government's, policy, we have to fulfill those categories: women-owned small business, minority-owned small business, veteran, etc. However, there's nothing for persons with disabilities, and shame on the federal government. This is Jay Burks' point of view. They should include, persons with disabilities in some of that contractual language, because corporations are already doing it.
Yeah, and that kind of took me to my next question, which is if we saw more explicit language in federal and state procurement diversity programs, I think you already answered it. Would that accelerate the inclusion of disability-owned small businesses?
Michael, yes. And, I always say it's if you don't certify, we can't identify. So for the DOBEs out there, and even within, the federal government contract and state contracting piece, when I was calculating goals and coming up with strategies, if you didn't certify, then I couldn't even articulate how to come up with an equation to make that percent, right? If there is nobody in that bucket, then the percent is zero. So you have to certify and become active, because it really, it helps remedy, any equation gap. Like, okay, well, I know there's 5 businesses in this space. Okay. So, and then you could come up with some type of percentage of, goal for diverse owned businesses.
You talked a little bit earlier about D&I. Really today, the discussion is often, almost always, not just diversity and inclusion, but also equity. And yet individuals with disabilities are not always included in that conversation. I'm curious about strategies you use which may further support individuals with disabilities with intersecting identities, whether it's based on race, ethnicity, gender, or other identifying communities like LGBTQ plus. Do you also try to look at that kind of intersectional set of identities? And is that yet another, or is that sort of the next generation of thinking about supplier diversity?
No, that is so true. That intersectionality, and quite honestly, if the minority businesses or women businesses, there may be, matter of fact, I'm sure there's a large percentage of those firms who are not certified or identified as a person with disabilities. And I think the key is for organizations like a Comcast and, Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies to keep making sure that's the top of the conversation. Even if it's a minority owned business, making sure that they know all of the categories that they can be certified with, because, persons with disabilities and DOBEs, we are looking to use those firms. And if you are an African-American owner, Hispanic owned, women owned, chances are within that supply chain, the firms that are disability in aren't getting as much as the minority or women owned business, if you will. So we're looking to, increase that spend. So that is, it's not the preferred certification of you, but those are that's the rising star. I should say that. That's the rising star certification where there's not a lot of representation. And that's something we want to grow significantly. That, as well as LGBTQ owned community. But those two are kind of the new kids on the block, as you said earlier, Michael, that we're looking to continue to grow.
As we kind of look ahead, you've probably seen many changes. You've talked about some of them clearly in the supplier diversity space. Who can predict where the economy is going?
Yeah,
hopefully getting better. Do you see, is there new ideas, new innovation, new thinking coming into the supplier diversity space? And what does that look like?
That's a good question. And, being in supplier diversity for almost 20 years, and seeing kind of the evolution. And you know what, over the last, post George Floyd's murder, you've seen a hockey stick commitment to supplier diversity, specifically within, the BIPOC community, which is Black, Indigenous people of color. But that momentum is so key to make sure all those diverse categories are included, riding that BIPOC wave and saying, hey, you know what, persons with disabilities. And what I'm seeing as well is the generations. If you're talking about generations, you talk about the changing workforce. You got your baby boomers, your Gen Xers, which I am, your Gen Y, Gen Z, and the alpha generation, which my daughter is. You're seeing these generations becoming more fluid with the differences in society, the diversity in society. So I see more of a commitment now. I see folks where you're a supplier diversity professional, where you're doing a lot of the pushing, like, hey, persons with disabilities, hey, you need to use LGBTQ. Where now I'm seeing is the pulling, like the people in the organization are coalescing around the principles of supplier diversity and inclusion, and it's going across the whole gamut. If they're just going to a restaurant and say, hey, I want to use a diverse business, where's the list of diverse businesses? So that's where I see, the supplier diversity industry going, and also just with more customized training and more customized tailored programs. You can, if you Google, you see, every corporation has these customized cohorts and looking to get more visibility within or diversity in their supply chain. So customized cohorts, and then just the changing, demographics of the workforce, I think really bode favor for, DOBEs and diverse owned businesses.
When I think about supplier diversity, I often have thought about it as sort of it's been very separated from other aspects of a corporation. But you've described something that really is, you seem more integrated, more an integral part of all aspects of the business, particularly in it's far more than procurement. You're talking about really how do we serve our diverse communities, which are our customers. Is that continuing to evolve, and is there more of an appreciation internally at the company for the benefits of this expanded view of supplier diversity?
I really do. And, and even if you start talking about the talent shortage, the job shortage, and we talked about the economy and the different generations, people want to work for a company that supports what they believe and supports their values. And you see it's definitely a more coalescing around this goal of, we work for a large company. We are responsible to the community. So we need to do everything we can do. If it's environmental, if it's ESG, if it's working with, diverse suppliers. I definitely see that momentum just continually to crest and grow as of late.
And something I just really thought about is your function, is it centralized, or is there also aspects of it that is decentralized, but you get to really bring forward the message that has been very loud and clear today and in this conversation about the importance and the continued expansion of what we mean by diversity?
What I love is that, we report up to our CPO, the procurement, Peter Kirikalakis, and our procurement is a hybrid. Most folks say, oh, we're centralized, but it is a hybrid. I'll be honest. There are the divisions and the regions, they purchase things of that nature. And what you're seeing, and which is great, because, we can, we have, 130,000 employees, give or take, across, all of the domestic United States. And what you're seeing is different regions and divisions, taking their own, how should I say, their own direction with regard to supplier diversity. It's, it's not me just pushing numbers and saying grow, 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 but you're seeing, the divisions having vendor spotlights, or the divisions, having a supplier diversity event and things of that nature. And it is great. It's great. It's if I was a control person, I was, oh my goodness, everybody's doing this stuff, but I'm not. And to be a supplier diversity professional, you have to allow for that, the leadership to evolve and for folks to take their own path. And granted, the principles are the same, if you will, but to see other regions and other divisions stand up strategies and coalesce around themes of that nature, it's just a great feeling. It's almost as if, like, there's supplier diversity. Although their title's not supplier diversity, they're taking on that supplier diversity moniker, which is great.
And in trying to expand this sense of really the expanded groups that are part of supplier diversity, do you utilize some of your successful vendors, in this case disability-owned businesses, to help people get their head wrapped around it? Because we have a long, unfortunate legacy, similar to other minority groups, of devaluation, discrimination. Sometimes that sits, and it's not intentional, but it's been so routinized into our culture. Disability is very similar in facing those challenges. So I'm curious whether, do you take your stars? There must be stars, who really are performing well and help help your both centralized and then decentralized procurement efforts understand, first of all, disability is so diverse. So as you said from the beginning, but just to help people understand, this isn't theory. This isn't politically motivated or anything. This works, and this is how it's working.
Like, I think that is a key strategy that all supplier diversity professionals and procurement professionals alike should take to heart, is to have, because in my opinion, the narrative changes behavior. The narrative, what you see, is going to ultimately affect your behavior and how you act and how you think, in my mind. So when you have suppliers, and we have some suppliers, matter of fact, it was just in Baltimore. This was a event where I had some suppliers come in and just talk about working with Comcast, diverse suppliers, not DOBEs, maybe DOBEs, but not DOBEs, not certified DOBEs, I should say. But they talked about, working with Comcast and just their story. And the room was about 100 or so folks. And that was just so impactful. And we do this at Comcast as well, as where we tell the narrative of some of our suppliers across the board, all diverse buckets, all diverse categories. If you look at our, social impact report, we have a couple suppliers in there over the years that have been diverse and have represented how they've supported Comcast and contributed to our competitive advantage. So I'm definitely a fan of, continuing that narrative, and businesses that are working with Comcast, even businesses that have struggled to try to work with Comcast. I still want to hear that narrative so we can identify where that gap is and how we can help close that gap to opportunity.
Hopefully, the many people are going to listen to this podcast once we put it on air. There are going to be small businesses that are owned by people with disabilities. What's the best way for them to explore competitive opportunities at Comcast?
The best way to explore competitive opportunities, when folks listen to this call here. Now, if you are a florist, or if you are a retail outlet, those opportunities, that doesn't flow up to procurement. Just understand it. And sometimes you have to level set, because individuals, and you must be a wonderful restaurant, but there are opportunities to promote your brand and to connect with supplier diversity professionals, but that may not be that procurable idea. So if you're listening to this and you say, I have widgets, or whatever the case may be, understand how to position yourself with, Comcast and the companies of the like. The best way is, I'm sure my contact information will be on here. Reach out to me, any organization, reach out to supplier diversity professional. We have a vendor registration portal where you can, upload your information and, register, do business. But just think about Comcast and the things that we use. Obviously we have consultants, we have IT staffing, marketing, creative services, vehicles, fleet, the list goes on and on. So I think that's just the key, just identify how you're trying to support, and don't think it's going to happen overnight. It very rarely happens overnight. It's a definite courtship. It's a definite understanding. Participate with disability in that intersectionality if you can. If you're in one of those other groups, if you will, participate in those as well, and just be present and stay on the radar, for lack of a better term, and not overly weekly, but just, hey, this is what I do. Let's have a talk. And we talk to, and multiple access points too. I'm the supplier diversity professional in procurement, but there's somebody who's over construction, or somebody over, consulting. So, hey, Jay, great, we talk. Can you point me to somebody in, consulting? And I could do that as well. But those are some of the things I really encourage, suppliers to do.
That's great advice. I'll leave you with just this last question. Is we don't have a crystal ball. No one can predict the future. But it sounds like with the level of commitment and support you're making, and that Comcast, I must say, for years has been very supportive of the disability community in product, in service, in its philanthropic side. But this is really a unique area, because this is about wealth creation. That's why do people start small businesses? They want to be their own boss. They believe they can do things if they're not working for someone else, but they have this vision, they have, they may need some help, as you've talked about, with building capacity and capability. It sounds to me like you're certainly very optimistic about the growth of this area in the supplier diversity component. I know you're part also of Comcast is one of a small group that are part of the $1 billion roundtable. Do you see what you're doing as being able to help push some of those companies accelerate their growth as well? And what does the future look like in terms of, if you're a person with a disability, you're really growing a company, like you said, it could be consulting, IT, it could be communication, it could be in so many different areas. It sounds like the opportunities are growing. Certification matters, but there really are ways to think about this as a path ahead to greater economic growth and self-sufficiency.
You summed it up well. And one thing that came to mind, Michael, is for suppliers listening that may need accommodations, quite honestly, sometimes the matchmaking events and things at these conferences may be overwhelming for me, so if those situations exist and you want to do business with a respective corporation, let the supplier diversity professional know, like, hey, I'm not going to the national conferences for purposes of, I don't do national conferences, but let's meet. Several things. I want to be clear to the audience that the supplier diversity professional specifically is to meet where both people can excel in understanding some of those challenges and remedying some of those challenges. So again, with the $1 billion roundtable, you said the $1 billion roundtable just recognized disability and, within the last 5 years, which is a phenomenal, that's moving the needle, and that's moving the needle for DOBEs, for, NGLCC firms as well, and veterans. So just these conversations, keep having them. Salute to you, Michael. Thank you for inviting me. This has been fantastic.
Jay, thank you so much. Whether you knew little or you knew a lot, I think we've added to the dimensions and perspective of the conversation. And I think we're all enriched, and particularly grateful to you for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Let's Get to Work, Reimagining Disability Inclusive Employment Policy, brought to you by the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.